All right, everybody. Welcome to our webinar. My name is Casey Klupfer. I'm Senior Research Analyst at Trellis Company. So happy to have you join me on this Friday afternoon. If at any time during the webinar you have a question, we're going to use chat today. So go ahead and type it in the chat box, and I'll try to pause and answer it. I may have to come back to it at a natural pause point. But once again, thanks for joining us. Today we're going to talk about student financial wellness, and this is going to be from our results from our Fall 2018 Student Financial Wellness Survey. A little bit about Trellis Company first. We're a 501c3 nonprofit. We're located right outside of Austin, Texas. We have a dual mission of helping student borrowers successfully repay their education loans and also promoting access and success in higher education. We've been doing this for nearly 40 years. We provide institutional services to student loan borrowers, support to institutions and communities. We also have the Trellis Foundation, which is a part of our company that does a lot of philanthropic work around the country. Today we're talking about the Student Financial Wellness Survey. This is a project that we started in order to make free of charge data available to all institutions that want it. If you are interested in participating in this survey, there'll be contact information throughout the presentation. You can contact me at any point. We are closing our sign up for the Fall 2019 survey next Tuesday, so probably not enough time to get involved this fall, but certainly would love to start working with your institution towards a Fall 2020 launch. So I'm a member of the Trellis research team, and we've done a lot of work over the years providing reports and blogs and insight into college affordability and student success. We would invite you to join our Twitter account at Trellis Research. We put a lot of new research publications up there, discuss a lot of our findings on there. It's the best way to follow us to find out what we're up to and what we're currently researching. You can also visit our website at trelliscompany.org/research to see our whole library of publications. So we do have several upcoming reports. Next month, I believe, we're going to release the first of a series of reports from a longitudinal study called the Financial Security Study, in which we track students over time from a fall to spring semester, including over the summer, interviewed them once a month to find out how their finances and their academics went hand in hand and what sort of challenges they were facing. Our first report's going to be over low food security, and be on the lookout. That'll be out next month. So the Student Financial Wellness Survey is what we're going to talk about today. We launched this on September 24th, 2018. It was open for 3 weeks. We had 58 institutions across 12 states that participated. 37 of those were community colleges, 10 were public 4-years, and 11 were private 4-year institutions. When you're looking at the graphs in this presentation, sometimes things don't equal up to 100% because of some rounding. Out of about 350,000 students that we surveyed, we got responses from 17,500. This was a 5% response rate. This is about right with online self-reported surveys. One thing we do in our report, which I encourage you to take a look at, the full 2018 findings report, is we provide a look at how those who responded might be different than the population at large. So you can kind of get a sense of that response rate and what goes into it. What we are happy with is an 86% completion rate, over 130 questions in the survey, and students who started, about 90% of them finished the whole thing, and it takes them about 14 minutes. On that point, those 130 questions are way more than we're going to present today, so I encourage you to go look at our report and see the findings. All questions to all responses, all responses to all questions are in the back, including broken down by sector. Today we're going to talk about the whole cohort from Fall 2018 of undergraduate students. We won't really break them up between community college, 4-year public, and private, but you can see that in the report. So if you have any questions, once again, type it in the chat box. Happy to answer. We think it's helpful to look at student financial wellness in 4 buckets. The first one I'm going to talk about is student financial security. Then I'm going to talk about basic needs security. I'm then going to talk about how students pay for college and student debt. And then finally, we're going to talk about student perceptions of their institution and of the support their institution provides. For student financial security, we know that these financial wellness issues are common challenges for post-secondary students. And we also know that these students that are surviving on narrow margins, they're going to be far more vulnerable to academic disruptions that are caused by unexpected expenses come up. And then there's also a mental and emotional toll of being financially insecure, living on the margins, and making tough decisions. One of the first series of questions we ask are about having enough money to pay for school, their academics. And we ask students, do you worry about having enough money to pay for school? And here, nearly 2 out of 3 respondents agreed or strongly agreed that they worry about having enough money to pay for school. When you're looking at these graphs up here, usually the blue is going to be agree, strongly agree, and the tan is going to be a disagree, strongly disagree. On the questions in our survey, we run crosstab analysis, so we try to see, do folks that answer questions one way, do they have a certain set of characteristics, or do they answer another question in a similar way? And here we found that students that worry about having enough money to pay for school, they're more likely to be a first-generation student and more likely to be female. When they're more likely to be female in this survey, one thing we think about is that female students lead single-family households at greater rates than males, and single-family households come with significantly more financial challenges. We wanted to know a little bit more to the point. Students, do you know how you will pay for college next semester? And here, nearly a quarter of respondents, 23%, disagreed or strongly disagreed that they knew how they would pay for college next semester. Those students that said they didn't know how they'd pay next semester were more likely to be a first-generation student, more likely to be female, and in this case, more likely to be enrolled part-time. We asked students, would you have trouble getting $500 in cash or credit in order to meet an unexpected need within the next month? Here, once again, almost 2 out of 3 respondents, 63%, said they would have trouble getting that $500 in cash or credit for an emergency. And this is where research connects with practice. We know that there's been some success with emergency grant programs that can provide small dollar amounts when a student faces an unexpected need. And we also know that students are reporting in exit surveys, withdrawal surveys, that some small dollar amounts kept them from being able to re-enroll in college. So we're talking about 4 new tires. We're talking an unexpected medical expense, sometimes an unexpected utility bill that comes in the summer. I know in Texas, those electricity bills can shoot up really fast and unexpectedly. Those students that said they would have trouble getting $500 in emergency, they were more likely to worry about having enough money to pay for school. They were less likely to know how they'll pay for college next semester. They're more likely to be a first-generation student and more likely to be enrolled part-time. We wanted to know about monthly expenses for students. So we asked, do you worry about being able to pay your current monthly expenses? And here, more than half of students did. 53% either agreed or strongly agreed that they worry about paying for their current monthly expenses. Those students that did worry about those monthly expenses were also worried about having enough money to pay for school. They were less likely to know how they'll pay for college next semester, and they were more likely to be a first-generation student. You'll start to see then in these crosstab analysis that a lot of the same questions are hanging together. I think it's a little redundant, but I think it's really important to drive home that some of these financial concerns facing students are also the same students that are worrying about paying for school and enrolling next semester, which is of course tied to retention. I just wanted to answer a quick question that came out. It said, when will the next study be completed and projected publication date? We're thinking March 2020 is when the fall 2019 survey will be published. We will be publishing some additional briefs, some small topic papers on the fall 2018 findings, so be on the lookout for that. Best way to see that is trellisresearch.com. The question also is, are there differences between public and private schools or full-time students versus commuter students? Certainly there is, and we break up some of the public and private school information in the back of the report, and we're going to talk about that in one of those briefs I mentioned. And certainly you'll be able to see differences between full-time students and part-time students in some of these crosstabs that we're talking about. We'll point out that a lot of these financial problems we're talking about, though, are similar across lots of different students. In particular, a lot of these financial problems are American financial problems that you'll see a large percentage of Americans who couldn't be able to get $500 in case of an emergency. But here with students, we see higher rates, and they're a more vulnerable population, and they're a population that is on the cusp of achieving something that could really mean a lot to them and their family, and especially their finances. So we asked students in those past 12 months, how many times did you run out of money? And this is very common among students to run out of money. So more than 3/4 of respondents, 77%, ran out of money at least once in the last year. More than half of respondents, 55%, ran out of money 3 or more times, and 34% reported that they ran out of money 5 or more times in the last year. Those students who reported that they ran out of money 5 or more times, they're more likely to be first generation. They're more likely to have trouble getting that $500 in case of an emergency, more likely to worry about paying for school, and less likely to know how they'll pay for college next semester. Students are supporting family financially while they're in college, and a lot of them are. So nearly half of respondents either agreed or strongly agreed that it is important that they support their family financially while in college. Those students that said that it's important that they support the family, they're more likely to be part-time students, more likely to be over 25 years of age in this case, more likely to be first generation. They're more likely to have trouble getting that $500 in case of emergency, and they worry at greater rates about having enough money to pay for school. So we dug into that, and we asked, who do you actually provide financial support for? And here, over 1/4 of respondents support a child or children financially while in college. This is much higher at community colleges, in the 30% range, but still very high for public four-year and private four-year. 17% are supporting their parents or guardians while they're in college. 11% are supporting other family members financially while they're in college. This has a lot of implications for being able to be successful in college, but what it also has implications for is financial aid. And we find that one of the things that's being talked about a lot is expected family contribution, and how in that calculation the lowest a family can do is 0. Sometimes when a student is a breadwinner for that family, that expected family contribution is actually negative. So when you hear conversations about negative EFC, what it's usually referring to is students that were breadwinners from the family, are going to college, and that family has a loss of income because of that. And here we see that come up in the data where 17% are supporting their parents and 11% supporting other family members. One of the things we want to do with this project is learn from institutions that are not only have conducted the survey, but may just be doing good work in this field thinking about financial wellness. And so at the end of each of these sections, I'm going to share a little bit about the research to practice side. Some of this information, some campuses have done a lot of interesting things. So one thing they do is evaluate the various touch points they have with students to provide additional support for financial literacy and entrance counseling. Certainly entrance counseling is a required moment at which someone who's taking out a student loan can be counseled on some of the issues around school financing, but also financial literacy can be very important for students. It can be very important for a broad range of students. Some students that financial literacy is more about how to obtain the resources that student needs. Some students it's about budgeting. Some students it's even farther ahead, thinking about repayment and just investments and interest in general. Schools have been using this information to develop baseline metrics to evaluate campus resources and interventions. So we've had many schools that have incorporated this survey into a 1 year or every 2 years check-in with the student financial wellness to see if the needle is moved from many of the things they're doing. I'll try to point out in the survey where there are some key questions that seem to have been very valuable for schools. But certainly starting to use this data over and over to see how interventions are working is something that's promising. So oftentimes we work really hard to help a student develop an academic plan, and that's become very common and very institutionalized. We don't often pair that, though, with a financial plan for how they would earn their degree. So a lot of institutions we've seen that have started to use this information from the wellness survey is that they've started integrating financial planning into that, and not only just for the 4 years, but thinking about repayment, also thinking about how credit hours and how many you take might affect financial aid, and informing students and getting students to develop a plan for that. We've also seen schools implement emergency aid programs. So this is something I talked about earlier, and certainly we're seeing some interesting findings about retention and how that can be linked to small dollar amounts. These emergency aid programs can very quickly and nimbly get support to the students. Oftentimes, the best practices on these programs are to pay the bill directly, so directly to the mechanic or the utility company. And so it can happen quick, and it can really keep a student on track. Schools are also using staff and faculty training on the financial realities of their students. And this isn't to mean that schools are trying to turn staff or faculty into social workers, but certainly staff and faculty having an understanding of the resources that are on campus and being able to direct students to those have been really valuable. And then beyond that, understanding the classic example that everyone talks about, that a student with their head down on the desk, they might not have a motivation problem. They may have been up working, or they may have gotten up early to take care of a family member that was ill or needed care. And that those indications that we've coded in our brains for a student that's disengaged may not be disengagement at all. Finally, schools are working harder to get students at least connected with safe, legitimate financial products like bank accounts. There was a lot of reform and abuse in the early 90s, late 80s. Some people might remember the credit card regulations that came down on campus, and certainly we're not talking about that. But more and more, we're starting to understand that there are financial products, even credit, that are helpful to students so that they don't turn to more riskier products like payday loans and auto title loans. So I'm going to pause there and answer another question. It says, do you use the student wellness instruments such as the PB well-being instrument 10-question survey? We've looked at that a lot, and we think it's a great survey. Our survey is really broad, and so we don't include that measure into it because we're asking a lot of different other questions. You can find more details about these best practices in schools. You can find them in the report, which you can find online. And certainly I do want to say that you should check out the CFPB and check out that 10-question student wellness instrument. And if you have any questions about that, feel free to email me. So basic needs security is the next section we want to talk about. And there's a growing awareness in this field of basic needs security. And what we know is that these students that are struggling with basic needs, nutrition, safe shelter, transportation, healthcare, etc., they're going to have a more difficult path to earning a degree. We use the 6-question USDA food security scale in the survey, and low or very low food security are defined as reports of multiple indications that a student has had disrupted eating patterns or reduced food intake. I encourage you to go check out our publication and look at the individual questions that make up the scale so that you can see how students and the percentage of students are answering these questions. It gives a little bit more context to what it means when we say that more than half of respondents in our survey showed signs of either low food security or very low food security within 30 days prior to the survey. And then here, 30% of those respondents were experiencing very low food security. This is another plug where I would love for you to read our report that comes out next month on low food security. really gives a much richer qualitative understanding of what does it mean to be low food secure or very low, and how students are experiencing this, because it isn't just a static state. It often students go into and out of low food security or very low food security throughout the year, and there are instances that are tied to that reasons, and so we really encourage you to read that report when it comes out. Those students that we reported that they had low or very low food security, they were more likely to have trouble getting that $500 in case of an emergency. They're more likely to worry about having enough money to pay for school, less likely to know how they'll pay for college next semester, and more likely to be a first-generation student. So here we are seeing, again, those connections between insecurity, basic needs, or financial insecurity, and the ability to pay or plan to pay for college. We ask students a series of questions on housing insecurity. This is defined as broad sets of challenges that are around the inability to pay rent, inability to pay utilities, moving frequently, living with folks in a house or an apartment that is beyond the occupancy of that house, and things like that. Once again, encourage you to go see the questions that make up this scale, because you can really get a good sense. But what we did find is in this scale, half of respondents showed signs of being housing insecure within the 12 months prior to the survey. Those students that were housing insecure, once again, a little bit of a broken record, but we think it's important. They're more likely to have trouble getting that $500 if an emergency happened, more likely to worry about having enough money to pay for school, less likely to know how they'll pay for next semester. They're more likely in this instance to be a first-generation student, enrolled part-time, be over 25 years of age, and in this instance, more likely to be female. I'll pause to answer this question. How do you think about helping campuses identify high-quality products and how they might distribute them to students? I assume we're talking kind of about the financial products. We don't really have a good best practice or promising practice on anything except bank accounts, and that's where we've seen some really interesting things happen. Austin Community College has a program in which they've partnered with their local credit union to be able to incentivize opening of bank accounts. That seems to be very successful so far, and certainly we know that a student that is banked is going to be less likely to enter into the sort of services like check cashing services that often then lead to auto title loans, payday loans, and some more riskier things. Certainly there's a huge difference in interest rates and payment of credit cards, and that's a big issue, and we just encourage institutions to think carefully about what sort of financial products are around and just really understand the ecosystem. Okay. Homelessness is an issue on campuses, and it's not only at institutions that serve primarily low-income folks, it's everywhere. I think a lot of our institutions are surprised by the amount of students who report a form of homelessness in the Student Financial Wellness Survey. The definition is a person that's without a place to live. They're often residing in a shelter, an automobile, an abandoned building, outside, or staying with people but do not have a permanent address. So couch surfing, which is extremely common, and those students are very vulnerable to being on the street or in a shelter or automobile if that housing falls through. We found that 16% of students were homeless within the last 12 months prior to the survey. So around basic needs security, campuses are doing a lot of interesting things. One thing that they're doing is they're providing emergency support services. So we see these in resource centers. There's an ARC center in Amarillo College, which has been written about heavily and is successful. And these sort of centers are providing wraparound services that that address needs like food, temporary housing, transportation vouchers or assistance, emergency funding. Sometimes these centers incorporate a social worker in it so that students can get support, be directed to the public benefits they're entitled to, things like that. What's really encouraging to us is that there are some very big studies that are randomly controlled, and random control trials are considered the gold standard, although often unattainable with study designs. But we have seen in random control trials that wraparound supports that provide things like financial support, academic advising, coaching, financial education, transportation vouchers, and general hand-holding through a college process are successful, and you see boosts in student success from that. These random control trials have been done at programs like the ASAP program at the City University of New York and Cuyahoga County Community College. There's also a similar program in San Antonio called Project Quest that's at the Alamo Community College District. And so when we see gold standard random control trials that are successful and they include all of these services, especially financial support, what that signals to us is that these support services are a good investment if you're looking at retention issues. So we also see that campuses they're connecting these financial education resources that are struggling to make their basic needs. They're also connecting campus resources, but the successful ones are marketing in a high-profile way. They're putting them in a place where all students see them, where it's destigmatized, and so they know that these services are for them. One thing we're always surprised about and just encouraged by the good human nature of students is that they often think that these support services aren't for me, they're for someone who's struggling more. But they are for them, and so being able to market these as something that every student should take advantage of if they are in a spot that they need support is really important. Certainly I mentioned connecting to public benefits. We're seeing some interesting partnerships around the country with local housing authorities, and there's a few things in Washington State around connecting homelessness with housing. That's encouraging, but also where applicable and where state laws allow, connecting those students who need access to food stamps that are eligible for that can be a great step to take. One low-hanging fruit that I think is just a really great and easy thing that schools can do is if you encourage faculty to just put some of those basic need resources that are on campus in syllabi, you can reach at-risk students. And so just having a forefront in a syllabus that if you are struggling financially, here's who you can talk to, and even maybe encouraging them to speak to faculty if they're experiencing those challenges. Some institutions are working with vendors to make sure that there's a low-price healthy food option at all campus dining areas, something like a $2 to $5 healthy meal. We've seen that at institutions, and it seems to be successful. There's also a lot of programs around students sharing additional money that's on their food account, sharing that money with folks who have less money and who need that support. Lots of things around this happening on campuses, and it's exciting to see. And finally, crisis support teams are starting to become more common when thinking about basic needs issues with students. So this has been something that's been very successful in health and mental health services, where a student indicates to somebody that they are having a crisis, and then that person, there's a structure in place to bring multiple elements of campus around to support that student. So it really is about breaking down barriers on campus and having a structure where if someone indicates they're having a crisis, that people are there to support. So we're going to move on to paying for college and student debt. And the survey looks at different sources of how students are paying for college, and they're exploring attitudes around student loans, their financial knowledge, and we're also going to talk a little bit about risky borrowing. So this graph is is a eyeful. And what it is we ask students, do you use these methods to pay for college? And these are the percentage of respondents who said, yes, I do use these methods to pay for college. The most important thing we think about this graph is to consider the broad nature of how students are paying for school. Maybe 30, 40 years ago, a student could pay for college by working, taking out a grant if they were eligible, and maybe taking out a student loan. 2 or 3 sources. Today, that funding source has broadened so much. Students are using more and more employment, savings, support from their family, scholarships, credit cards, loans their parents are taking out. And so when that funding structure broadens, there's more of a risk that if one of those falls out, it's going to be a small dollar amount, maybe $500 to $1,000. But if it falls out, the student will struggle to come up with that shortfall. So when there's less funding sources, financing is more secure than when these funding sources are broadened. Here we found that more than half of respondents, 56%, are using that current employment to pay for college. 48% are using support from their parents or family to pay for college, and about half are using personal savings. Nearly a third of respondents, 31%, are reporting that they're using credit cards to pay for college, a method of payment that can come with risk and a high interest rate if students either fail to pay that balance or they fall behind on paying their full monthly balance, which could lead to less access to credit for the next semester when they have to pay. The question is, the percent is greater than 100%, meaning there's multiple sources. Yes, they could respond, click all that apply, do you use this method to pay for college? So all of these sources will equal more than 100%. It was a question that came up. So we asked a series of questions of the folks that responded on that last question. Do you use student loans that you took out for yourself to pay for college? We asked these students, do you have more student loan debt than you expected to have at this point? We found that more than half of respondents who borrowed, 58%, either agreed or strongly agreed that they had more student loan debt than they expected to have at this point. We know from research that students tend to underestimate their student loan balance. So here we have over half of students that are saying they have more debt than they expected, and they're probably underestimating the amount of their student loan debt. We asked the student loan borrowers, how confident are you that you'll be able to pay off the debt acquired while you were a student? And here we found that more than 2 out of 3 respondents were either not at all confident or only somewhat confident that they could repay that debt acquired while they were a student. And this includes the makeup of that. 30 percentage points of students were not at all confident that they could repay that student loan debt. And once again, we know from research that students don't always have the realistic expectations. So students tend to overestimate the amount of money that they're going to make out of college. And so they're overestimating that amount, and they're still not very confident that they can repay that debt. We wanted to know a little bit more about sources of borrowing that are a little more riskier. And so we asked about credit cards, paydays on loans, and auto title loans. We found that credit cards, about 43% of all respondents reported that they borrowed on a credit card in the past 12 months. And this is for any reason, not just to pay for college. What I showed you earlier was how many say they're using it to pay for college. This is for any reason. We found that 8% have taken out a payday loan in the last year, and 5% have taken out an auto title loan. We wanted to dig a little bit into the information of those students who said they borrowed on a credit card. And we asked, how many times did you use that credit card for something you did not have money for? And 85% of students said they used their credit card 1 or more times for something they did not have money for. More than 2 out of 5 respondents, 41%, said that they used that credit card 5 or more times for something they did not have money for. This is a kind of an interesting set of questions. So we asked students that borrowed on a credit card, do you always pay your bill on time? And here, more than 3/4 of students, 76%, either agreed or strongly agreed that they always pay their bills on time. When you ask those same students, do you fully pay off their credit card balance each month, we found that only 28% would agree or strongly agree that they pay their full credit card balance off each month. So this is signaling that students are getting behind. They're accruing an account balance that will lead to interest rates that will accrue that interest at a high rate. It also means that they're lowering the amount of money that they have access to in case of an emergency when they're not paying off that full balance. We also asked a series of questions, 3 questions from a researcher named Lusardi around financial knowledge. These 3 questions, once again, I encourage you to go check out our report, trelliscompany.org/research. Check out the report and see what kind of questions we're asking. These 3 questions are about mostly about interest rate and time value of money. We found that only about 1 in 4 respondents, 21%, could answer all 3 of these relatively basic interest-related, time value of money-related questions. We did find that 81% could answer at least 1 question correctly. So when schools are using this information around paying for colleges and student debt, one thing that they're doing is they're informing instructional design around student loan counseling and financial education interventions. So if this is the amount of students that are struggling on to consider that they're going to pay their student loan off, that can really inform their student loan counseling and financial education. Certainly thinking about that broad range of financing for college and helping students understand that more in a financial education setting is also important. We looked at schools are looking at these environmental factors, so campus policies and procedures related to student payments, collection, and debt products on or near campus. So one of the things they're doing is they're saying, okay, here's the financial realities of our students, and they're having discussions around policies around drop for non-payment or things like that are related to what a student may owe an institution. Certainly those are hard discussions, but ones that come up a lot when thinking about this sort of information. And then just having an awareness where around campus there's debt products, understanding the proximity of payday and auto title lenders on campus. So you start to understand better where students may turn to and can maybe appropriately intervene. This financial planning for a degree and repayment is also becoming more common. So having a student have a financial plan for how they're going to repay those student loans could increase their confidence. And certainly someone who is confident about repaying that loan is going to be more, is going to have less stress and be able to concentrate more on what they're doing in school. And then finally, once again, bank accounts. Schools are helping students become banked so that they avoid using check cashing services that can lead to riskier products. All right. Finally, what I want to talk to you all about is student perceptions of institutional support. So what we know is that there's a lot of research over the years about belonging and how a student, their belonging and how they feel that they belong on campus is linked to retention. And certainly it doesn't take a large stretch to consider how student finances might play into their sense of belonging on a campus. So we look at where students are talking about their financial issues, their awareness of student support services, their perceptions of how the institution addresses affordability issues, and we present back to the institutions. This first chart is once again a little bit of an eyesore. Let me try to explain it a little bit. So we ask for these series of items, do you agree or disagree that your school makes the following items more affordable? What you'll look at in blue is agree and strongly agree. Tan is disagree and strongly disagree. We found that many respondents believe their school makes tuition more affordable. 59% of respondents agreed or strongly agreed that their school makes tuition more affordable. 44% believe required class supplies are made more affordable, 38% transportation, and 32% food. We think this set of questions can be really important to institutions considering year-over-year change of these things, or certainly where they stand in relation to other institutions. So, for example, if there is an open resource initiative on campus where they're trying to reduce costs of textbooks, you would hope that the amount of students who agreed or strongly agree they work to make textbooks more affordable would be lower than other institutions, or you would see that change over time. The same goes with the food initiative or when messaging tuition. You would hope that those things would change. Oftentimes, if they don't change and there is an initiative on campus, that is pointing to marketing. So it's helping schools understand, okay, we have this thing, but students don't seem to be saying that we're working to make that affordable. We are. So maybe we need to invest more in marketing to let them know about it. So going back to textbooks, one common complaint that we hear in focus groups is that these textbooks are too expensive and rarely used. So we hear in focus groups, that textbook costs more than that class did that semester, or that textbook was $300 and we used it for 1 week. Doesn't that professor understand what that money means to me? And those are the sort of statements that we believe are that can link to belonging and whether they feel like they should be here. In our survey, we found that more than 2 in 5 respondents, 44%, disagreed or strongly disagreed that their school works to make textbooks more affordable. We asked students, do you think that your school is aware of the financial challenges you faced? And so 2 in 5 respondents, 40%, did agree or strongly agree that their school is aware of their financial challenges. But 31% disagreed or strongly disagreed. And that's where you start to have some concerns of, am I supposed to be here? Do they get what situation that I'm in? We asked students, does the faculty at your school understand your situation? And here again, around 40% or around 40%, so 37% exactly, agreed or strongly agreed that their school's faculty get their financial situation, but another 29% disagreed or strongly disagreed. For this set of questions, we're asking, here are some individuals on campus. Have you spoken with these about your financial struggles? We found that 34% of students had not spoken with any of these individuals about financial struggles. However, the most common person, a school official on campus, was a financial aid advisor at 53% reported speaking to one, and then an academic advisor at 38%, followed by a faculty member at 23%. This is another one where we see these levels change a little bit when there's an institution that has made an initiative to broaden the areas on campus in which they engage students talking about finances. So when there are conversations amongst academic advisors about paying for college and how they'll do that, you see those numbers go up. And certainly with the financial aid department, it's very compliance focused, and there's a lot of work to be done in those areas that can compete with time to do one-on-one counseling or discussions with students. So we do think that when you see those academic advisor percentages go up, that's a good thing. So some of the things that institutions have done with this, they've created these communication strategies that can provide realistic costs of education estimates. Going beyond, the direct costs of college and thinking about what does it mean to live off campus, what does it mean when a student transitions from on campus to off campus in some situations. In some areas, that can lead to really high rates of housing insecurity because a student does not really understand what utilities would cost, what it means to find an affordable house, how far an affordable house might have to be away from campus in order to be affordable, things like that. So communicating those realistic costs are important, and we think primarily just because we've encouraged students to enroll in college, to complete college, to get a degree, but we don't often follow up with that with saying it could be hard, and sometimes it's hard financially to go to college, balance work, find enough money to do these things. And so informing them about those realistic costs can be helpful. Schools are working to provide intentional programs and discussions around reducing supplemental costs of education. So one of those is open educational resources. We are seeing a lot of savings for students when moving to online textbooks, more, or open resource textbooks. One thing is that there are it's a complicated subject. So one thing faculty do say sometimes is that, well, those open education resources don't come with the bells and whistles like online quizzes or homework assignments or workbooks or worksheets or lesson plans. So important to loop everybody into understanding how is the best way we can reduce some of those supplemental costs of education. Once again, training staff and faculty about these financial realities. If there's going to be you want a faculty member to know that if there is a book that's expensive, there are some ways that students are dealing with that. And one way they're doing it is not buying the book. And we're learning that from our qualitative research and from our focus groups, is that sometimes the student won't buy it until necessary. And at that point, there could be complications with that, whether checking it out from a library, finding a more a source to get it cheaper, or really just not have already spent the money that at the beginning of the semester that should have gone to purchasing all books. Having staff and faculty get that, even if it's to try to work to help them understand the importance of that investment in the textbook, it can be helpful, we think. And then finally, evaluating how we message affordability can be important. So oftentimes making a freeze tuition on tuition, or even like a smaller decrease of how tuition is growing, is a big deal on campus, and it requires oftentimes folks to give up a lot on campus, or hard decisions to be made. But it can also come off as insensitive to students who don't understand, who are struggling financially and may not understand that affordability message. So thinking through, some institutions we've talked to are thinking through how do they message that to students to inform them of the good work they're doing without turning them off. So with that, I'd like to do two things. First of all, thank you so much for joining me. I have information up here, and please reach out to myself, my Director of Research, Jeff Webster, or the Vice President of Community Investment and Government Affairs for Trellis, Brian Ashton. If you have any questions, please follow us on Twitter at Trellis Research. Be on the lookout for our publications. If you would like to be involved in this survey, it's completely free of charge. We are about to start our Fall 2019 survey, so we'd be happy to work with you on Fall 2020 or anyone you know. We're also working with a lot of associations and systems across the country, and to include their whole cohort of institutions in this free service, and also to produce more aggregate reports on their cohort so they can tell about the ecosystem in their state and things like that. So with that, I'm going to open it up to questions, and I'll answer questions for the remaining time in the hour, or until all questions are done. So I have a question from Richard that says, do you have lots of schools who completed the survey in a particular state such as Florida? So we were in 12 states last year. We did have Florida. We had Valencia College in Florida, and we have a few coming up in this semester. If you send me an email, I can share who we're working with. But yes, we're trying to broaden this as much as possible to all states. So more questions. Is your data publicly available? So our response frequencies to all questions are publicly available, and you can find that in our report. Our data set is not, because it is linked to things like credit hours earned, race, ethnicity, gender of the student. All of those are those student level records we're not sharing with anybody, and we're using it only for the purposes of creating reports for schools and for creating aggregate reports. I see the follow-up, Steve. You said in addition to what's in the report. No, if it's something that isn't a student level record, that is just a question of maybe how these items might break up by a student characteristic, I'd be happy to talk with you about that if you'd like to send me an email. I have another question here. How do you reach students when your population is online exclusively? So it isn't a survey of online students. It's a survey of 350,000 students that the vast majority are enrolled in a traditional undergraduate education at a community college, four-year public or private. The survey itself is delivered online for some kind of practical reasons such as costs and other reasons like that. How do you reach those students? We do a few different things. We work with schools to send out communications. So the school is sending emails out to students that says, be on the lookout for this. We're trying to learn more about your finances in order to better support you. Another thing that we do is we offer an incentive across all institutions to win a set of Amazon gift cards, one of 25. We try to get that stuff. So that's how we recruit. A follow-up was saying you work at an online institution, so there's no physical access to students. Yeah, so there, we're sending those things out, and a lot of the questions really, I think most of them are going to apply whether you're an in-person student or online student. And here, reaching those students is about the school's ability to market to those students and say, this is important to us. We did a lot of focus group testing to say, to find out from students what would make them complete a survey like this. And one of the top things they said is, we want to talk about our finances. It's stressful at times, and it's something we want to share. That was a big reason. And they also said, we want this to mean something. So in communications, talking about this is an important topic and it's important to us can be important, can be helpful. Other questions? All right. Well, once again, thank you so much, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Trellis will be conducting webinars monthly. Please keep up to date with us and follow us on Twitter at Trellis Research. Thank you so much, everybody, and have a great weekend.